there, I'm author Sarah A. Chrisman.
I'm Gabriel Chrisman.
And today we're going to be talking about my book, A Rapping at the Door. A Rapping at the Door is book 3 in the Tales of Chetzemoka, and each of the Tales of Chetzemoka focuses on a different character in the community. This one is McCoy's book. Now, Nurse McCoy is a lot of people's favorites. She was very fun to write. Her name is, it's kind of a double joke. It's a joke and a reference because there in American history, there are two families, the Hatfields and the McCoys. Now, if you're American, you probably know all of this already. But
at least have the general idea.
But I'll touch on it a little for the folks from elsewhere. The Hatfields and the McCoys were famous for a monstrous feud that went on for years and wound up with a significant number of them dead.
It was in Appalachia.
It was in Appalachia, which is where McCoy is from. And so throughout the series, she'll occasionally make remarks of, we're not them McCoys, we're not kin to them McCoys, or about the trouble her family's been into with hogs, because the whole feud started over a hog. So it's kind of a historical reference to that, in a sideways way, because she'd be the first to deny that she's related to those McCoys. And it's also a joke with Star Trek, because the Doctor in Star Trek is Dr. McCoy. And when I finally got to the last book of the series, I worked in the line I'd been trying to work in through the whole series, where McCoy finally gets to say, "He's dead, Tim." And I don't have a Jim in the books, but I have a Tim. And so McCoy gets to say, "He's dead, Tim," in the final book. But anyhow, this is the one that focuses on her. And in the book, if you're really keen when you were reading it, you might have noticed a bit where she's writing a letter to her Uncle Eb. And pay attention to Uncle Eb, because he'll be important much later in the series, in the last book. Now, this book it's sort of a thriller, gentle thriller. Yeah, it's a bit of a mystery. It's a suspense story. And all of the places that are described in here are real places. So the town of Chetzemoka, as I've mentioned many times, is based on Port Townsend, where we used to live. Silas's house is, the outside of it at least, is based on a very big mansion right up on the hill outside of Port Townsend. And I never got to go inside because all around the outside are so many no trespassing and keep out signs, which is kind of appropriate, actually, for the characters. And so for the interior, I had to draw on other house museums that we've seen. And the Bishop Hotel is a real place. When I was writing the scene where McCoy is looking for Esmeralda, and I actually went downtown and I snuck into the hotel and was snooping around, and it still has the original layout, more or less, because originally, so the office was upstairs. That's where you would check in. And that little room is still there. They just don't use it anymore. Downstairs, the room that's now the office used to be the one of the lounges. Now, hotels used to be set up with a ladies' lounge and a men's lounge. And the distinction between those was the ladies' lounge was the non-smoking lounge and the men's lounge was the smoking lounge. That was the big difference. If you ever see in historical books or references a reference to a ladies' lounge or a ladies' car and a train, the difference between that and the men's car is the men's car allowed smoking and the women's didn't. But anyhow, Four Corners, which is also in this story, is another real place. We used to go cycling to there. But lots of fun real places. And the sources, well, let me tell you a little bit about what happens in the story. So what happens in the story is that this sort of shady ne'er-do-well comes to town and is sneaking after Silas. And the idea is that she claims she can speak to the dead, and
this was a fairly common and important piece of American history at the time.
yeah. Why don't you say a little bit about that?
So spiritualism, as it was known, had really gotten its start in an earlier era in the 1840s and 50s, but by this time was well established, both by
Blavatsky was the...
well, that was theosophy.
Yeah.
Slightly different than spiritualism and adding in a bunch of other weird things.
Yeah.
That one really did arise in the late 19th century. But the spiritualists were characterized, you had both serious, true believers in this, who included some very significant people, Arthur Conan Doyle, a whole bunch of other people, Mary Lincoln.
One of my relatives, my great aunt Phoebe.
Exactly. And so there were people who took this as a serious religion, and then there were people who took this as a business opportunity.
An opportunity to con people.
Exactly. And this book very much follows someone for whom that is the take they have on spiritualism.
Esmeralda.
Yes.
And so Esmeralda comes to town, and no one's quite sure where she came from or what she's about, but she claims to be able to speak to the dead. And so she's conducting seances, and I don't want to give away too much of the plot, but so Esmeralda is conducting seances, and Kitty, who had lost her first husband very young, is very interested in all of this, and so is Silas, who had been very close to his family, and so he's missing his parents.
And these were common situations. There was a lot of mortality in the 19th century.
Well, there's a lot of mortality now. People die. It's part of the human condition.
I know.
Yeah.
But it was even more common then.
Well, I think people were more willing to deal with it then.
That is true.
Nowadays, when someone dies, they're just forgotten as soon as possible.
Yes.
It's interesting. People criticize the Victorians for saying that they didn't like to talk about sex, but and that they were obsessed with death. But I think that what's happened now is that people...
A bit of a reversal.
People are obsessed with sex and they don't talk about death anymore. These are both important parts of the human condition.
Yes.
They're part of being alive.
Mm-hmm.
And, yeah, it doesn't make any sense.
Interesting, yes.
But anyhow, I'm digressing. So, you've got this sort of con artist coming to town, and she's telling people she can speak with their departed loved ones. And one of the things that comes into play is the potential for a breach of promise suit. And where that came from, this is a book by Alan Pinkerton. And Alan Pinkerton, he started a big detective agency.
The detective agency.
The detective agency. Actually, at the time, the federal investigators took their cues from these guys. And
they protected Lincoln before there was a Secret Service.
Right. And this particular story of his, which is a true story, is his story of investigating a phony spiritualist con artist who has gotten into an old man's confidence by saying that they have these spiritual sympathies, and which was a common trick. And then she winds up filing a breach of promise suit against him. Now, breach of promise, I've done another video on this, but briefly, breach of promise in the 19th century, if a man proposed marriage to a woman and then reneged, she could sue him. And the women won in something like 99% of the cases.
Yeah. And there's excellent books if you're interested in that subject, of course.
Right. The one he's got there is Breach of Promise to Marry by Denise Bates, which was a big source for me when I was writing A Rapping at the Door, because part of what comes into the story is this potential for a breach of promise suit. That's what everyone's worried about. And also, with the seances and how those were conducted, I wound up drawing a lot on Houdini's book, The Right Way to Do Wrong, and then a number of different books and articles on how seances were conducted, how people would convince other people that they were seeing ghosts and seeing spirits. That's where the glow-in-the-dark paint comes in, that I did another video on. And throughout the course of McCoy exposing this fraudster, because McCoy has been hired to take care of Silas. He's a hypochondriac, and he hired her to take care of him. Now, she takes this very seriously. She knows he's not really sick, but she figures that her purview is not strictly limited to physical illness. She's going to take care of him in every way she possibly can, and that includes showing con artists the door. And so this story is following her as she's trying to work out what's going on with this Esmeralda character, how she's doing all of these tricks.
And how to get her out of the picture.
And something that comes up as one of the tricks that Esmeralda does is, as she's convincing Kitty that she's speaking to Kitty's dead first husband, she takes Kitty's watch and manages to stop it. Now, with a mechanical watch, there's an interesting trick you could do to stop it. Do you want to talk about this one?
No, you go ahead with this.
Okay, so if you take a mechanical watch, it's predicated on the perfect movement of tiny, tiny little cogs and gears. Now, if you ever played around with a magnet as a child, if you take a small piece of metal, or any piece of metal if you've got a powerful enough magnet, but usually a small piece works best, and then take a powerful magnet, put the two together for any length of time, and the metal will become magnetized. Now, if you have a watch that works by tiny pieces of metal moving in perfect harmony with each other, if you turn those tiny pieces of metal into an assortment of magnets, it's not going to work anymore. And so, one thing that these con artists would do to show how powerful they were is that they would put someone's watch close to a magnet, and it throws off the balance wheel. It also magnetizes all those tiny little pieces, and so the perception is, wow, they really must be, in touch with some ethereal force, because they're disrupting this thing that is it is the rational force. And so that's something that happens. Another thing that comes into the story is hair art, because Kitty has a little piece of artwork that has her hair and her first husband's hair, and Silas has a hair wreath that has the hair of various members of his family.
And these were very common and popular in the 19th century.
Right, right. And hair art is a very interesting thing. No one does it anymore. It sort of went out when photographs came in. But it was a real art form. It was a real way of taking, and it wasn't always with the dead. It was oftentimes just with a loved one, period. And people still save locks of babies' hair.
They do, yeah.
And in the 19th century, they would take the hair and they would make fine little pieces of art and or jewelry out of it. Now, in the back of the book, there are some recipes for things like the coasting cookies that come up time and time again in the series, because those are a favorite of the club, and these are a spice cookie, and that Ken and Felix are always pining after, the Kitty's coasting cookies. So
right.
If you like historic recipes, there's a few of those back here. And something that I wanted to call out that's kind of fun is Felix's penchant for hot sauce. That's another theme throughout the stories that first comes up in this book, is that Felix loves, actually I think it first comes up in Love Will Find a Wheel. It comes up virtually as soon as Felix does.
Yeah.
He loves spicy food. He loves hot sauce. And the reason I wanted to make a point of that in the series is that I don't know why, but back at the time when I was writing these, it seemed like everyone we met was absolutely obsessed with asking us what we ate. And also they all had this really strange idea that the only authentic 19th century food was a reductio ad absurdum, just this
incredibly bland,
overblown idea of what their grandmother had served at Thanksgiving dinner. Yeah, they had this idea that 19th century food was this really caricaturized version of their grandmother's Thanksgiving dinner, and anything else was not authentic, which was weird.
Yes.
It was weird. But Tabasco sauce comes from the 19th century. There were a lot of spicy foods and a lot of exotic foods. I mean, you had the British Empire going to India and bringing back curry. And
there were curry recipes in all sorts of cookbooks in America and England at the time.
Yeah, you had recipes from all over the world going back and forth, and it was a very, very cosmopolitan, very worldly cuisine that people had at the time. And I was just getting so fed up with people, you know, thinking that there was one 19th century food that if you didn't subsist only on that you were not being authentic. I got tired of it. And so that's kind of where Felix's love of hot sauce comes from.
Yes.
And then the way the chums take their coffee is just that Felix always has his black. Ken always has his with as much cream as he can get, and he'll try to upend the sugar pot. And that's just them. Felix is the more serious one, especially as the series progresses. And Ken is just a big kid, honestly. And then another thing that comes up for the first time in this book is there's a certain way that the chums hook their bikes together, which comes from 19th century cycling magazines. And with an ordinary bicycle, a high-wheel bicycle, there is a way, if you have two of them, so if you've got two guys out for a ride together, you can actually lean the bikes against each other if you don't have something else to put them against. And the bikes will actually support each other. Now, nobody does this anymore because the bikes have become so valuable, and no one wants to scratch up the nickel finish. But this used to be something people did in the 19th century when they were out for a ride. And so that's just something that comes up in here for the first time, and it continues throughout the series. But, yeah, for the most part, this is McCoy's book. And because it's from her point of view, it's written from her very feisty, very no-nonsense viewpoint of the world. And she doesn't think she's any great shakes. She just doesn't understand how the rest of the world can be such plum fools. And the whole book is from that perspective, which makes it a really fun book.
Yeah, you really enjoyed writing that.
I enjoyed writing this one.
Yes.
So, I hope you'll check it out. So, wrapping at the door, Book 3, The Tales of Chetzemoka. And I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a nice thumbs up. And remember to tell your friends about my books. Happy reading!